everybody. I'm Tracy Tucker, and welcome to the Who is in My Genes podcast, where we share adventures in exploring family trees, including tips for researching your own family tree, stories about discoveries, DNA testing and matches, and lots about adoptee searches and advocacy, because we believe everyone has a right to know who is in their genes. In this episode, I'm going to talk about some DNA surprises, meaning someone took a DNA test through one of the direct-to-consumer DNA testing companies like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, or MyHeritage. There are others. And surprise, in some way, the results were not what was expected. This could be anything from being someone who's adopted and who has no idea who their biological families are and now have 47,000 matches, which is what happened to me. Or maybe someone thought they knew who their bios were, but maybe their dad's side of the family isn't showing up in their matches, and some strangers are showing up as close relatives, to a host of other things that can happen when you test, just so you know. Let's start with adoptees because they're the ones who likely took a DNA test to find biological family like I did. Sometimes you get a surprise right away, like one of my adopted clients who took an Ancestry DNA test, got her email that her results were in, logged in to take a look, and surprise, her biological mother was her first match. That'll throw you for a loop. Some are a little more work than that. In my origin story episode, I explained that I figured out who my biological paternal family, my father's family, was based on a couple of possible first cousin matches. So how exactly did I do that? First, how did I know they were probably first cousins? When you test at Ancestry, your DNA matches show up in a default sort order of closest relative to the most distant. These two matches showed up in my close family matches. Ancestry also tells you how many centimorgans, that's abbreviated small c capital M, you share, and how much shared DNA you have in percentage terms. Centimorgans are a unit of measure for the frequency of genetic recombination, or a unit for measuring genetic linkage. Well, what the heck does that mean? It's really a scientific term that isn't easily understood, at least by me, other than knowing it's used in analyzing your DNA. It basically is used to describe how much DNA is shared between two people and the length of the specific segments of DNA that are shared, which are divided up into centimorgans. The more centimorgans you share with someone, the more closely you're related. The most any two people can share is all of their DNA, 100%. In the case of identical twins, which they're not even always 100%, but usually 98 to 99% or more. The next most is parent and child, which share about 50% of their DNA, so about 3,500 centimorgans, as children get half their DNA from their mother and half from their father, and so on. After those two, most DNA relationships are described in ranges. So these two particular matches I had both shared about 12% of their DNA with me. One at 806 centimorgans and one at 810 centimorgans. The standard percent of shared DNA for first cousins is 12.5%, with the number of centimorgans ranging between 575 and 1,300. The possible relationships for this amount of DNA isn't just first cousins. It includes also great-grandparent or great-grandchild, great-aunt or uncle, great-niece or nephew, half-aunt or uncle, or half-niece or nephew. I have a relationship table with all of the percent shared DNA ranges and possible relationships on my website and Instagram. The link will be in the show notes. It also explains halves, seconds, removed, and a few other family relationship terms. So that gave me a start on what these two matches could be. Second, how did I know they were on my paternal side? In that origin story episode, I also mentioned that I knew my birth mother was Scotch, Irish, Dutch, and my birth father was Macedonian. Those are two pretty different ethnicities, even though they're both European. So, if that was correct, that should show up in the ethnicity of my matches too. By the way, ethnicity is now called origins on Ancestry. My own ethnicity or origins currently include 7 main regions. My chart's posted on my Instagram if you want to see it. My current chart is 27% Balkans, which includes Macedonia, 24% England and Northwestern Europe, which is mostly England, 22% Scotland, 12% Greece and Albania, 9% Central and Eastern Europe, 3% Russia, and 3% Germanic Europe. So if you add all of those up, it basically means I'm pretty much 50% Western European and 50% Eastern European. So you may be able to see where this is going. My biological mother provided roughly the 50% Western European, and my father the Eastern European half. So when I looked at my matches, that could give me a big clue about which side of my biological family the matches were. My half sister on my mother's side, for example, is 75% England and Scotland, whereas my half sister on my father's side is 32% Balkans and 12% Greece and Albania, very similar to me. Both of them tested much later, so their ethnicity wasn't available at the time I was doing this research, but in looking at those two close family matches that fell into the first cousin range, I took a look at their ethnicity. The first one was 49% Balkans and 12% Greece and Albania. Aha! The second one was 26% Balkans and 19% Greece and Albania. Aha again. So based on that, I was pretty certain they were on my father's side. I then used the few public names they had on their own family trees and ancestry to start figuring out who they actually were and how we were related, which led me to the discovery of who my biological father likely was, and that they were indeed first cousins. Once you have identified a few of your DNA matches in Ancestry as either on your mother's or father's side, Ancestry will start sorting the rest into the two sides for you based on shared matches. It does this in batches, so you may not see it right away, but it will happen eventually. So what about other types of surprises? So here's a fascinating story. A relative of one of my former clients contacted me because her ancestry DNA results had just come in and she had questions. She had kind of a unique family situation and wanted some help figuring it out. Her initial surprise or confusion in this case was that her known biological nephew didn't match her in the expected range. Their shared DNA was lower than she thought it should be. So she explained to me that she had a much older sister and a brother. The brother she was raised with, though, was actually her older sister's son that her parents had raised as their son. She and this brother slash nephew were only 2 years apart in age. Her question was her sister actually her mother also? Which was puzzling because everyone knew her brother was the older sister's son, including him. Why would they have kept the secret from her? Why would they have told him and not her? So I said I would take a look at the results, which I did. I found some close family matches that didn't really belong. And when we discussed it, she said she recognized one of the surnames, which was the same as a couple her parents were friends with when she was a child. Dun, 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 dun. I could see pretty much right away that one of these matches was likely her half sibling based on the amount of shared DNA. So I built a tree for this family with the surname and discovered that the potential half sibling was the daughter of the man of the couple her parents hung around with. So I reviewed her known DNA relatives and started making sure that what I suspected could be proved through the amount of DNA they shared, and it did. So we arranged a time to talk on the phone, and I said, well, I have good news and bad news. And she said, give me the good news first. And I said, well, the good news is that your sister is not your mother. Your mother is your mother. She was relieved to hear that. On to the bad news. Your father is not your father. It seems the man your parents hung out with is your biological father, and that close match you see on Ancestry is your half sister, this man's daughter. I think at the time she was relieved that her sister was not her mother, and maybe didn't process the info about her father, but we talked again later more than once, and she put all the pieces together based on what she remembered, and we eventually did locate the man's living daughter who happened to live pretty close to her. So talk about surprises. Though this one is kind of more common than you might imagine. Surprise, your dad's not your dad. DNA testing really is outing all the secrets. It outed my biological mother's secret. It outed my half sister's mother's secret that her dad was not her dad. And this client's mother's secret, the same. The latest stats I've found say that more than 30 million people worldwide have taken one of the direct-to-consumer DNA tests. Ancestry alone has more than 25 million. The other two biggies are 23andMe, which has about 15 million, and MyHeritage, which has more than 9 million now. Obviously, there's some overlap. For example, my DNA is in all three of those databases. Some people believe that there will be a tipping point, at which point all the secrets will be there for the taking, because even if you haven't taken a DNA test, enough people you're related to will have. Reminder, I have 47,000 DNA matches in Ancestry alone. So if there are any secrets in your family tree, they will out. Some believe we've already reached critical mass in this regard. However, there are a few countries who have banned this type of DNA testing for privacy reasons, including France, Germany, and Switzerland. They say it's because of concerns over how the companies may use the information, but my guess is they have completely different motivations, which you can probably guess. I heard somewhere, I don't recall now, that France specifically implied that it would break up too many families, but I cannot source that, so it could be totally untrue. The examples I've given so far were relatively easy to work out, those surprises. Some are very obvious or take little work. Maybe just an hour or two or a few days of reviewing matches and building a family tree. But some surprises are not always so quickly or easily figured out. One client of mine was adopted by his mother's side of the family, so he knows who his mother is and her family, but not who his father is. I love to help people in this situation because I believe everyone has a right to know where they came from. He also had taken an ancestry test, and he gave me access to his DNA there. I analyzed his matches and started building a family tree based on those matches and their family trees. And I did identify who is likely his grandfather or his great grandfather. Now, I've worked on this tree for over a year now. And the surprise here is that this man, his grandfather or great grandfather, was married twice and had a total of 12 children. Almost all of those children had at least one child of their own, if not more. And none of the matches are close enough in DNA terms to determine which of these 12 children my client came from. And I haven't found any descendants who are in the right place at the right time, at the right age to father him. So I've suggested that he take a Y DNA test from Family Tree DNA. I'll put a link to this in the show notes also. Y DNA tests identify matches only along the male line, so fathers and sons. The odds are not really in our favor that one of his family members have taken this test, but it's worth a shot, because if we find a match close enough and that match knows his family members, maybe we could figure it out. These tests are not cheap though. I've also suggested he take 23andMe and MyHeritage tests as well. In the DNA testing world, when you're looking for family, it's best to fish in as many ponds as possible, we say, meaning as you can afford to, as it helps your chances of getting that one match that's going to bust the whole thing wide open. That's why my DNA is everywhere. I've taken just about every direct-to-consumer DNA test available, including a few that you've probably never heard of. I've also given him some suggested language to reach out to his closer DNA matches to see if they can help, and if they know of any cousins, aunts, or uncles on that side of the family who would be willing to test. I usually suggest that you don't start with, "Hey, I'm adopted, looking for my biological family," as that can scare people off, and that's not what we need. We need more matches to figure out who his father is. And I'm confident that one day, one of us will open up one of his DNA match lists and, surprise, there will be the match we need to figure out who is in his genes. Thank you for listening to the Who Is in My Genes podcast with me, Tracy Tucker. If you enjoyed it, please give us a great review to help others find the show, and follow us to get notified of new episodes. Visit us online at whoisinmygenes.com for all the ways we can help you find out who is in your genes, and follow us on Instagram for the images we mentioned in the show. Links are in the show notes. Join us next week for a new episode of Adventures in Exploring Family Trees.